Someone insults you, someone questions your integrity, attacks your performance, or throws a passive-aggressive jab in front of people whose opinions matter to you. What is your instinct? Your heart rate spikes, your breathing turns shallow, your jaw tightens. You immediately feel a surge of heat in your chest, and your brain scrambles to fire back, to hit them with an equally sharp comeback, or worse, to frantically start explaining yourself. No, that's not what I meant. No, you don't understand the context. No, let me prove you wrong. Stop right there. Look at what just happened. In less than 3 seconds, without laying a single finger on you, that person pulled your biological levers. They dictated your heart rate, hijacked your nervous system, changed your facial expression, and forced you to spend your precious cognitive bandwidth defending yourself on their terms. They won. Completely, effortlessly, and unconditionally. Here is the brutal truth of behavioral mechanics. Your emotional reaction is a surrender of authority. The moment you react, you prove that they hold the steering wheel of your internal baseline. The moment you offer an explanation, you acknowledge that their low-level test carries weight, and you place yourself in a submissive posture, begging for their validation. You think you are standing up for yourself, but to anyone who understands human behavior, you look frantic, compromised, and completely out of control. Most people spend their entire lives playing this exhausting ping-pong game of emotional reaction and defensive explanation, bleeding status and peace of mind everywhere they go. If you leave right now, you will continue falling into every social trap set for you. You will keep giving away your energy to people who deserve nothing more than your absolute crushing indifference. In this breakdown, I am going to reveal the exact neurological mechanics of emotional provocation. I will show you why explanations weaken your authority, and I am going to hand you a 3-part physical protocol to master the deadly art of strategic ignoring. Stay through to the very end, and you will learn how to make your presence totally unshakable. Walk away, and you remain an easy target. Every human interaction carries an invisible framework of authority and frame control. When someone attempts to provoke you, invade your space, or bait you into an argument, they are issuing a direct test of your internal baseline. They are testing to see if your emotional state is solid, or if it can be easily shattered by a few words. When you react, when you raise your voice, snap back, or display visible frustration, you instantly lose frame control. You inform the entire room that your nervous system is fragile. You prove that your sense of worth is tied to external input. A high-authority individual does not react because there's nothing in a low-level provocation that threatens their baseline. Your reaction is the exact drug the provoke is hunting for. Withhold it, and you deprive them of the power they sought to exert over you. The most potent weapon in human behavior is not a sharp insult or a loud confrontation. It is absolute, cold, unyielding indifference. When someone throws a jab at you, and you respond with absolute stillness, a steady, unblinking gaze, a relaxed jaw, and a complete lack of verbal acknowledgement, you create a massive psychological void. You refuse to absorb their energy, which forces that energy to collapse back onto them. By ignoring the attempt entirely and continuing your task, you execute a total invalidation of their presence. You send a clear, subconscious signal to their nervous system. Your input carries so little value that it does not even warrant a shift in my respiratory rate. The exact second you react to an external provocation, you execute a silent, total surrender of your psychological authority. In the unspoken mechanics of human behavior, every social interaction is an ongoing negotiation of dominance, frame control, and emotional stability. When another individual throws an insult, casts doubt on your capability, or initiates a passive-aggressive test, They are not merely speaking words, they are deploying a deliberate probe to measure the density of your baseline. They are testing to see whether your sense of self is anchored in an unshakable internal foundation, or if it is a fragile structure easily disrupted by ambient noise. The moment you offer a visible emotional reaction, a flash of anger, a defensive shift in posture, a spike in vocal pitch, or a quick nervous retort, you provide them with instant biological feedback. You communicate to everyone watching, as well as to your own nervous system, that this external actor possesses the remote control to your internal state. By reacting, you signal to the room that the provocation was valid enough to breach your defenses and alter your physiology. In mammalian behavioral hierarchies, the entity that remains calm and unaffected retains the dominant position, while the entity whose baseline is easily manipulated assumes the subordinate role. When your heart rate surges and your breathing becomes shallow in response to someone else's words, you are implicitly acknowledging that their opinion carries weight, that their judgment threatens your standing, and that you are compelled to fight for your position on ground they chose. You trade away your composure for a momentary flash of emotional venting, leaving you exposed, compromised, and predictable. To an experienced observer of human behavior, a person who reacts instantly to stimuli is not showing strength or passion. They are revealing a critical lack of self-regulation and an acute vulnerability to basic psychological manipulation. Furthermore, reacting to a provoke creates an immediate energy leak that completely drains your operational bandwidth. Your prefrontal cortex, the center for strategic thought, emotional control, and complex execution, is hijacked by the primitive threat detection centers of your brain. Instead of maintaining absolute focus on your primary objectives, your mental resources are suddenly diverted into managing an unnecessary conflict that yields zero long-term value. You begin processing the interaction on the provocateur's terms, burning through precious cognitive currency that should have been reserved for high-stakes decision-making and personal progress. You effectively allow a low-level distraction to dictate your immediate priorities, pulling you out of a proactive state of creation and dragging you down into a messy, reactive posture of defense. To retain true authority, you must recognize that your emotional baseline is your most sacred asset and refuse to let outside forces tamper with it. When a provocation lands, your immediate task is not to counterattack, but to enforce absolute physical and emotional stillness. You must train your central nervous system to perceive attacks not as existential threats requiring an immediate defense, but as low-value environmental noise that does not warrant a single heartbeat of acceleration. By withholding the reaction the aggressor is hunting for, you instantly collapse their leverage, break their attempt at frame control, and demonstrate an unshakable sovereignty over your own mind. Explaining yourself when attacked, tested, or questioned is a subconscious surrender that instantly betrays your internal instability. In the unspoken framework of human interaction, high-authority individuals operate from an implicit baseline of non-negotiable certainty. Their actions, decisions, and worth do not require external validation or social consensus to exist. The moment you rush to offer a detailed defense, justify your choices, or persuade a critic to see your perspective, you send a clear, non-verbal signal that your confidence is fragile. You communicate that you are deeply rattled by their assessment and that you urgently require their approval to regain your emotional equilibrium. Instead of standing firm in your reality, you step down from your position of authority and place yourself on trial, voluntarily adopting a defensive, submissive posture before an audience that was merely testing your boundary. When you engage in over-explanation, you implicitly elevate the aggressor to the role of the supreme judge while casting yourself as the accused. In behavioral mechanics, whoever holds the authority to demand an explanation controls the frame of the interaction, while the person scrambling to provide answers surrenders control. By defending yourself against a low-level provocation or bad faith attack, you validate the premise of the challenge itself, signaling that the attack had enough merit to warrant your cognitive energy and time. You begin speaking too quickly, packing your sentences with unnecessary details, caveats, and logical justifications in a desperate attempt to prove your innocence or competence. To anyone observing the dynamic, this verbose defense does not project truth or strength. It projects guilt, anxiety, and a frantic attempt to repair a damaged ego. This compulsion to explain is rooted in a deep-seated psychological vulnerability, a fear of being misunderstood, disliked, or socially rejected. Your brain perceives the external disapproval as a threat to your standing, triggering an automated impulse to soothe the tension through verbal persuasion. However, trying to explain yourself to someone who is deliberately testing or attacking you is an operational failure. An aggressor does not want an explanation. They want the satisfaction of seeing you lose your composure and force you into a state of social begging. When you indulge this urge, you waste precious mental currency on a game designed for you to lose, continually handing your critic fresh words, logic, and angles to twist against you in the next round of confrontation. Complete, silent ignoring is the ultimate weapon of strategic invalidation because it strips a provocation of its power and turns the attacker's emotional energy directly back onto themselves. When an individual attempts to provoke, insult, or challenge you, they do so with a clear psychological expectation. They expect to extract an emotional payoff. They want to see you flinch, stutter, raise your voice, or scramble to defend yourself. That reaction is the validation they seek. It confirms that their presence was impactful, that their power was recognized, and that they successfully disrupted your mental state. When you respond with total, absolute silence and an unbroken lack of physical acknowledgement, you disrupt this expected feedback loop entirely. You deny them the emotional payoff, creating a sudden, jarring psychological void that leaves their aggressive energy hanging in the air with nowhere to go. In human social mechanics, attention is the fundamental currency of status and authority. Granting attention to a person, even in the form of anger or argument, acknowledges their status as a worthy adversary. Conversely, withholding your attention entirely executes a devastating, silent rejection of their relevance. When someone throws a jab at you and you continue your task, maintain your steady breathing, and refuse to even adjust your optical line of sight, you send a profound subconscious signal to everyone present. Your input carries so little weight that it does not even warrant a shift in my physiological baseline. You render their attempt at dominance completely invisible. This silent invalidation turns the psychological table instantly, forcing the provocateur to experience a sharp spike in cognitive dissonance and public embarrassment as they realize their effort failed to make a dent in your composure. Absolute indifference is not a passive act of running away or staying quiet out of fear. It is an active, micro-calibrated physical stance rooted in absolute control over your nonverbal mechanics. Most people believe that ignoring someone is simply a matter of not speaking, but human nervous systems communicate far more through subtle physical leaks than through words. If you remain silent while your shoulders tighten, your jaw clenches, your eyes dart around nervously, or your breathing turns rapid and shallow, you have not ignored the provocation at all. You have merely suppressed your verbal response while your body screams to the entire room that you are internally rattled. True, strategic indifference requires absolute mastery over your micro-behaviors, ensuring that your physical baseline remains completely still, unbothered, and immune to external disruption. The foundational pillar of this physical stance is absolute control over your ocular mechanics and facial movement. When a provocation lands, the primitive brain instinctively wants to lock eyes with the threat in a defensive stare, or look away quickly in a submissive show of discomfort. A high authority baseline avoids both traps. Your eyes remain completely calm, steady, and unblinking, holding a relaxed focus without leaking aggression or fear. Your facial muscles must remain entirely neutral. No tight lips, no forced smiles, no micro flinches, and no subtle sneers. A neutral face acts as a blank wall. It gives the provocateur zero emotional data to work with, completely starving them of the feedback they need to calibrate their next move. You look at them not as a threat or an enemy, but as an inanimate object or a minor background detail in your environment. Equally critical to this physical protocol is the regulation of your respiratory and postural mechanics. The exact moment an external conflict arises, your body's autonomic nervous system attempts to initiate a fight or flight response, causing your chest to tighten and your breath to shallow. To enforce true indifference, you must deliberately override this physiological shift. You consciously drop your shoulders away from your ears, open your chest, and slow your breathing down into your abdomen, forcing your heart rate to remain steady and low. Your limbs remain relaxed, free from nervous fidgeting, tapping fingers, or defensive arm crossing. By physically forcing your body to remain in a state of rest and composure, you send a powerful neurofeedback signal back to your own brain, confirming that there is no real danger, while projecting an aura of unshakable physical dominance to everyone watching. This micro-calibrated posture alters the entire power dynamic of the room without requiring a single word. When an aggressor brings heat, volume, and tension into a space, expecting to drag you into their chaotic tempo, and meets a human wall of slow breathing, still eyes, and absolute physical relaxation, their momentum instantly dies. They are forced to confront the stark contrast between their erratic, out-of-control state and your grounded, effortless stillness. By mastering the non-verbal mechanics of indifference, you convert what could have been an exhausting emotional battle into a masterclass in personal sovereignty, proving that your physical baseline is dictated solely by your own mind and can never be shaken by the cheap noise of your environment. Eliminating emotional reactions and defensive explanations is not merely a tactic for winning petty social games. It is an absolute necessity for protecting your finite cognitive currency and operational bandwidth. Every human being wakes up each day with a strictly limited reserve of mental energy, managed by the prefrontal cortex and dedicated to high-level decision-making, complex problem-solving, emotional regulation, and deep creative execution. When you allow yourself to be baited by an external provocation, you initiate an immediate, high-cost withdrawal from that cognitive reserve. Your brain shifts out of a clear, goal-oriented state and begins allocating massive amounts of processing power to analyze the insult, construct defensive arguments, replay the scenario in your mind, and manage the physical stress of anger or embarrassment. You end up wasting hours of prime mental capacity processing low-value noise that yields zero tangible returns for your life. This loss of bandwidth creates a compounding penalty that directly impairs your long-term output and daily momentum. When your operational focus is constantly hijacked by social drama, petty conflicts, or the urge to defend your ego, your attention becomes fragmented. You enter a state of continuous mental fatigue, where the energy required to execute difficult, high-friction work has already been consumed by useless emotional friction. You find yourself sitting at your desk or pursuing your goals with a compromised brain, unable to reach the depth of focus necessary to produce high-value results. High performers understand that focus is their most critical asset, and they recognize that engaging with critics, trolls, or bad-faith provocateurs is a disastrous investment of time and neurological energy. They treat their attention as high-value capital and ruthlessly deny access to anyone attempting to steal it for trivial games. Protecting your bandwidth requires you to reframe every social interaction through the lens of strict operational efficiency. You must begin viewing provocations not as personal insults that require a defense, but as intentional traps designed to disrupt your momentum and steal your focus. Ask yourself a simple, cold question. Is this person's opinion, test, or criticism worth spending 10% of my daily cognitive energy on? The answer is almost universally no. When you realize that reacting costs you real productivity, peace of mind, and mental clarity, ignoring the provocation ceases to be a struggle and becomes an automated, logical choice. You simply choose to keep your energy invested in your own mission, refusing to let an outside distraction derail your focus or dictate how you spend your mental resources. By mastering the discipline of emotional non-engagement, you build an impenetrable fortress around your mind that guarantees your focus remains entirely dedicated to what truly matters. You stop letting the outside world push your buttons, set your priorities, or manage your mood. Instead of being dragged into every argument you are invited to, you step back, conserve your mental currency, and channel that unspent energy into relentless execution of your personal and professional objectives. You allow the noise of the environment to wash past you harmlessly, while your internal spotlight remains firmly locked on your own trajectory, enabling you to operate at peak cognitive performance every single day.